All right. At UFC 270, this will be on January 22nd of next year. The heavyweight title will be technically unified, but certainly up for grabs when current champion Francis Ngannou takes on the interim champion, rising challenger, Ciryl Gane. Here to discuss the bout with me, as I've been thinking about it a lot, is the coach of the champion. This is Eric Nicksick, the head coach, at Xtreme Couture. Hi, Eric. How are you?
Good to be back, Luke. Good to talk to you, man.
Yeah, haven't spoken to you in a while, so let's get things going here. I have a lot to ask about Francis. I have a lot to ask about the game more generally, and then some about Ciryl. Let's start with Francis if we can. I noticed something in his schedule. Now, obviously, life is a lot more complicated now for him in some ways than it ever was. But in terms of his competitive schedule, he was fighting roughly 3 times a year for a while. But in 2020 and then 2021, now that this fight will be in 2022, those will be the only 2 years where he'll have only fought one time, and he's doing it back to back. So what do you make of the lack of time in the cage? Is it a good thing given what else is going on, or how do you assess that challenge?
Yeah, I think you could go either way. And of course, we always want to have cage time because for us, that's where you're making those improvements. It's like going to college. So, yeah, I think having cage time is always nice, but it's also nice to be able to do things behind the scenes. You know, like you and I talked about before, we were working a lot on the wrestling game. We weren't really having to show it in fights. And then we were able to see a glimpse of that in the Stipe fight when we were able to win the title. So there's been a lot of improvements, I think, technically that we're able to make behind the scenes. But again, it's like, when are you getting your actual reps when it matters the most? And that's in the cage. So, yeah, I think you can go either way. It could be a catch-22. Me personally, you know, I would like for him to be more active and you know, getting that call that we're fighting January 22nd, man, made us all feel pretty good.
When you imagine you had to speak to an audience that had never seen Francis and didn't know him, and you had to explain from a style standpoint what kind of style he implements, what would you say?
I think he uses different tools now to fit the job. I think that he's understanding that he doesn't always have to win the fight with his power or one KO knockout skills, that he's evolving into a true mixed martial artist. So for me, I think like intimidation factor, when you see him, his presence, that is always going to be daunting. That's inherent. But I think when you start to understand his growth as a martial artist and an athlete, he's seeing that, like, that true champion form, that he has to win fights maybe in different facets. And you start understanding the way GSP made his run. I mean, he was beating Thiago Alves within his own game. He outstruck that guy. He beat Josh Koscheck by out wrestling the wrestler. And I think those champions start to understand it's like they have to evolve, but they also have to be very good at all facets of MMA. And I think he's up for that challenge.
Would you say not so much now, and especially not in the Stipe fight, but let's say early on, and for the record, you didn't when was the first fight you started working with him?
The first fight we started working together was Junior Dos Santos, but he was at Xtreme Couture training full-time for Curtis Blades 2. So he was here for Curtis Blades 2, Cain Velasquez, then JDS. So he's been in the gym, but I started working with the more one-on-one stuff during like JDS.
Okay, so it might, what I'm about to ask might even predate this. In fact, I'm pretty sure that it does, which is to say, when I go through the tape, I watched all of his fights before this interview. It's actually not the ones that take a little while are the 2 losses in the middle, quite frankly. Everything else is pretty fast for the most part, which we'll talk about in just a second. But early on, what I noticed was he liked to stalk opponents. And he would throw a combo from the outside, but they were kind of wide. What he more seemed to want to do was pressure them, get them to react, and then he was kind of a counter striker. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, like a pressure release fighter, add pressure, release pressure to drop him back into something as a trap. Yeah, I could see that absolutely.
Yeah, but now in the Stipe fight, right, he was double jabbing to drop the cross. He was tricking him with all different – he was creating openings, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. I think – if I had to measure one of the biggest pieces of his growth, and I only have what is observable, I certainly don't have the information you have, but it did look to me like he had really put together a game where he didn't have to wait for things to happen in fights. He could make them happen. Yes?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that just kind of comes from like a lot of things that we talked to him about is like, you know, you're not a barroom fighter. You see bar fighters, they just throw punches. We want to throw punches with accuracy, but we want to throw them with purpose, and meaning like, where do you want to place the head? Where do you want the head to slip? what setups are you going to do it off of it. So we like to place punches, not just throw them wildly just because that's what we're doing. You know, and the funny thing is, like, you know, we got a lot of flack because of the Jairzinho fight, and that went completely opposite of what we were trying to do and accomplish. And I know it doesn't really sound correct, but you know, even when he knocked out Jairzinho, he even laughed about it. He's like, oh, what the hell was that? Like, we didn't work on any of that stuff. And I was like, well, you know, sometimes you're gonna go berserker mode. It's gonna happen. But moreover, I think with myself and Dewey, we just wanted him to understand that, like, the placement of punches is more important because it serves a purpose for the betterment of the entire fight. It's almost like being a pitcher and you're placing your pitches and setting things up for later on as it goes.
When you started working together, did he articulate to you what he was looking for from you?
Yeah, man, we had a really it's a cool moment, I think, for me and him. And we just went to dinner and we sat down, and I think we started to trust one another a little bit more. And you know, I just asked him, I was like, you know, what are you afraid of? Like, what areas of your game do you want to improve in? Like, honestly, just kind of what you said, like, where can I help you? And he's like, man, I know my cardio, my MMA, my fight IQ, my things like that are my areas I really lack, and I want to get better at, you know. And as a coach, now you kind of understand what your needs are as well. You're not just throwing shit against the wall and hoping it sticks. It gave me kind of a little bit of a tunnel vision where I know I didn't have to step too far outside of these areas and just dial in the things that he needs. But really, Luke, I think it just became a comfortability between him and I, that we knew that we were always going to be there for one another, and that, like, you started to see the growth more. I think with him, he was always worried about people taking advantage of him, right? He didn't want to put people in a circle that he's like, I've been hurt too many times, or this or that. So to tie that answer in, it was like, I trust you. I believe in what you're doing. And here's what I want. And can you stay in your lane and do the things that I'm asking of? And that's kind of, I think, why our relationship has worked out so well.
How teachable, how trainable is fight IQ?
I think it's reps, to be honest with you, Luke. And we talk about, you know, putting ourselves in situations over and over and over again. And like, if you're in football and you can run a route with your eyes closed, it just becomes muscle memory. So if it's one particular drill or one particular thing, if we can just really hit those reps over and over and over again, so where it just becomes automatic for you, you don't even have to think about it. And whether it's the wrestling game or the striking game, or we're hitting switch crosses or adding things to the arsenal, for me, it's just almost like finding the right repetitions for him, and allowing him to maintain his creative control. Because my whole goal is like, just to give you a bunch of paint, but allow you to still paint your picture, maintain your creative control as the mixed martial artist. So for that, like, for the give and take purposes, I think, like, he's very coachable, he's very teachable, but you also have to allow him to still be creative and do the things that he wants to do in the cage as well.
But you would agree that, like, some people are born with naturally better decision-making skills in fights, but there is a component that can be taught through the course of instruction, however long that period may be.
Yeah, I like to talk about, like, playing the percentages. You know, it's like, we'll play the percentages in this situation. Like, if we're mounted a guy, what are the percentages of us going for an arm bar, dropping out of a mount position to go for an arm bar with 3 minutes left on the clock? And you think to yourself, well, you know, it might be very difficult to submit a high level fighter in this position. If they get out of it, then where are they at this point? Now they're back on top. So I lost a dominant position to go for a submission that might not be my best submission. And, you know, so you just start thinking about scenarios, and you start playing to their strengths and play the percentages correctly. And I think people start to understand the situational awareness better when you talk about the fight IQ, you know. So when you put them in these scenarios and these situations over and over in practice or live sparring or things like that, like, we'll reset positions, be like, all right, I want you to start with the guy and your back hooks in. We're going to see the way you're trained and where you want to go from there. So for me, I think, like, just getting the reps also, but understanding what the percentages are after those things, or hey, if you do this wrong, here's what's going to end up. Your safer route is doing this. And then it starts to resonate with the fighters more and more, in my opinion.
Got it. Okay. In terms of the development of a fighter, and again, you got this one kind of halfway through, or whatever the portion of his development is, but certainly not at the beginning. But let's imagine that you did, or it's not even about Francis per se, but just when you build a fighter from scratch, a guy walks into the gym. So how does it work, right? At first, they just get so the individual skills themselves. Let's imagine it was jujitsu. Here's an arm bar. Here's a shrimp. Here's a mount escape, whatever. And then they begin to stack those on top of each other. Then they begin to add concepts to when they are applied and the best practices therein. And then there seems like there's another level beyond that for like the high level pros and whatnot. How would you assess the development of a fighter from individual, here's how you throw a jab cross and shoot a double, to the incorporation of this high level decision making and where it gets placed in, like, this is the heavyweight championship, bouts like these?
Right. Yeah, I think it really is depicted on the fighter and what they can retain and what their skill set looks like. And a prime example, like from what you're saying, is like Dan Ige. Dan came to us as from basically a regional scene young kid. And, it was like learning how to throw punches correctly, but slowly but surely just adding these little base layer things that maybe a little bit more high level each time out, and allowing him to apply those in fight situations and scenarios. So over time that they feel more comfortable when they see it or they're able to do it. But again, like we talked about earlier, it's like, you can't have Dan Ige maybe doing the same thing as what your Uriah Hall would do. The skill set's just different, and maybe their fight IQ is not in that regard, to where they're trying to do things that really are out of place or just not really fitting the moment. So yeah, I think it just really depicted on the fighter and where they're at in their career and their skill set and how you can implement it. But with Francis, the nice thing about him is when you explain things to him, and you and I talked about this in the past, when you explain things to him on the reasons why you do something, and that tends to resonate with him more, it retains better. It's like, well, like you talked about earlier, why are you throwing a cross to the chest? Well, it negates level change. It also, if a guy's trying to shoot on you, it's a punch coming in the midline, right? So if a guy's trying to shoot, now if I drop down, I get a right cross in my forehead. Right. So when he starts to understand why I place these punches in certain areas, why the fight IQ starts to make sense for him, and then how you start applying it as their skill set begins to grow.
Interesting. So with a guy like Francis heading into this contest, how much of an implementation were you able to see in the Stipe fight? I guess I want to back up a step here before I get right into Gane. Obviously he won, and he won rather handily. Watching it again, I was like, wow, man, Stipe had that one nice punch in the second. That was really about it. How much of a fuller demonstration was that of what he has shown you?
Yeah, I think for us, that was pretty much what we drew out. And the nice thing was it just was executed perfectly. And I don't think that, you can ask for anything better. But yeah, it was exactly what we tried to do in the game plan, and it just unfolded right in front of us. So he executed everything perfectly. And then, we understand, like, in fights, it's never going to be that perfect. You're going to get curveballs, things are going to happen. But all in all, I think that what he showed in that fight was what we were all impressed with, was really his calmness and his fight IQ and his situational awareness on not running in and rushing and attacking a guy like Stipe, who, in my opinion, has gotten better since the first Francis fight himself.
As I was thinking about this, was one question that was A, relevant for Francis, B, relevant for any contender, and I think C, very relevant for the time in which he was coming up. So let's say 2017-ish, something like that. Obviously he was coming up before that, but I'm just sort of identifying that as a marker where you could clearly state he was a rising contender, was the wrestling question. And now you think about it, the Enrique fight, he had to face it. In both Stipe fights, he had to face it. In both Blades fights, he had to face it. How do you feel about the wrestling question with Francis? It seems to me that, I don't know if he'll, I can't say that he'll never get taken down. I can't say that he'll have a perfect showing every time, but it does seem to me like it's more or less settled. Does it not?
Yeah, I think so, but I think there's still going to be times and opportunities where I think opponents should test wrestling at any capacity, no matter who the opponent is, because it adds an element to your level change. It gives them something to worry about. If you're a la carte and all you're doing is striking, and then there's not something else within the MMA skill set that you're not worried about, I think you get kind of where you get complacent, or you're just focused on the one style. But if you could just score 1 or 2 takedowns within a fight at any level, right, whether you're the wrestler or not, it just brings so much more out of your striking when you feint levels and you do other stuff, because now they have to worry about it, and you collect so much data with hand placement. So with Francis, I think people are going to want to try to wrestle him, because that I think you should. I think people should try. But all in all, for him, he's fallen in love with this, and he's not missing grappling days now. Like the days where he was here was just sparring. And we all know, like, it's hard. We run hard grappling practices here. But what he's starting to understand is like, oh, I can win fights this way too. I can win fights emphatically, getting topside half guard and raining elbows down on somebody's head. It's a scary sight, Luca. I've been under there. I've been holding the pads for him at times over there. And that's the nice part about it, is he's not running away from the things that scared him before. Now he's running to it.
With Francis and let me state this about when you assess Gane, when you think about him, what's the biggest challenge you're up against?
I think his composure. I think his efficiency. I think efficiency comes to mind when I see him. I was more impressed with his Volkov fight than anything. I thought that Volkov was going to pose the biggest challenge. I wanted to see what he did with Volkov, and he answered all those questions. So when I look at Gane, I just see a very efficient striker, very fluid, light on his feet. So I think he's the maybe try to get him out of his element in some regards, making it uncomfortable for him, so he just doesn't have that fluidity throughout his rounds. That we're going to have to do some things to make him feel panicked. And that, I think those are going to be our biggest challenges, to be quite honest with you.
So I mentioned the answering of the wrestling question, right? It's been so thorough at this point. Again, not saying that Francis is the perfect wrestler, just that this idea that once he faces a wrestler, the whole thing would come apart pretty clearly is not true anymore. But again, individual rounds and engagements will matter. Is Gane unique enough in your mind to say that Francis has a previous opponent close enough like him to say that was a pretty close in style opponent?
I'm trying to think, looking back, nothing really that would stand out to me as far as stylistically with Gane. The nice thing is he's been in there and sparred with him before. They've sparred together before. So some of the intel that I can get from their training sessions, albeit in the training room, is very different. But I think what Francis knows about him already is going to be some of our best intel that we can get, rather than, maybe a previous opponent or something like that. But, we've been looking quite a bit on trying to find heavyweights that can come in and maybe mimic some of what Gane does. And it's not very easy. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I was thinking about this. I don't know. Do you think Gane is the future of fighting? And here's what I mean. I kind of set it up all this way because, 10 years ago, 15 years ago is very much about making sure you were well-rounded. But sort of once you had those bases covered, it was kind of assumed that maybe you don't win a title, but that was enough to take care of itself. And now we see these other layers where guys are really mastering round management. They're mastering distance management very carefully. It's very much a feint, and it's almost like, it's weird. I mean, maybe this is a crude and maybe it's an incorrect comparison. He sort of feels like a heavyweight version of the combination of some of the feinting, not as aggressively, but as frequently as Volkanovski. But he's got the bounce of Wonder Boy, and yet he's this giant heavyweight. Boy, that's quite a challenge.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily think that it's like per the individual, but I think where the fight path is going is people that are able to hit from both stances and do it well and do it with fluidity, but moreover, not compromising their defense. So sometimes when guys are switching over to their opposite stance, if you're orthodox switching over to southpaw, a lot of times you see more defensive holes in their game. But now guys are doing it so often that I think that's where, to me, the MMA is evolving to is you're not just necessarily in this one stance. You can strike from both stances, which creates more traps, which creates more offbeat rhythms, things that we're not accustomed to, where traditional Dutch style might be, okay, well, if it's a hook, it's probably a low kick coming, where now it's like things are getting mixed up to like Giga is a great example, great striker. And in the comparison, when he was fighting Edson Barboza, I just, I got a lot of flack for it. I said, Giga's a better striker. The reason why I said that is because you can't ever really tell if he's orthodox or southpaw, because both stances he can hit, and you never know which one's his natural stance. He just does it so well. And I think that's where Gane really sets himself apart from the new age of MMA, is he's able to move with fluidity and efficiency, but also able to strike from both stances.
Why don't we see more of that kind of thing? We see that all different kinds of styles, and you do see switch stancing in boxing. You see it, but you don't see it with the kind of frequency and at the higher levels like you see. Like Fury played with it in the rematch against Wilder. Bud Crawford, famous for it, but it's not like it is in MMA. Why?
Maybe because of coaching. I know Ray Sefo was never a big wasn't in love with the stance switch stuff. Although, I remember him knocking out Jerome LeBander with a switch hook, and doing certain things. But under the tutelage of Dwayne Ludwig, I've been able to kind of look at things differently and kind of open my mind up with understanding what becomes available when you're able to strike from both stances. And a lot of it has to do with cage control, Luke. Like you're funneling guys into those corner posts, into the choke points of the cage. And you're able to do that in setting your traps. So when you watch guys like Connor or Israel is a great example, what Israel Adesanya is able to do by placement of punches, but guiding fighters where they want them to be to set the traps. And if you go back and watch a lot of what Israel does, a lot of those knockouts come from getting guys backed up to the red zone and moving them up into those corner posts. Same with Connor. But, the availability to hit from both stances, I think, is kind of where the MMA game's going. And if guys aren't working on it, they should be.
Speaking of which, I've seen Francis do it a little bit. He did it for just a fleeting moment. He did it in the Stipe rematch, and I think he did it, I want to say, maybe the JDS fight, maybe not that one. I don't know, but I've seen it a couple of times. Is it something he prefers, and you guys have dissuaded until further development? Where's your relationship with that and Francis in particular?
We work on it quite a bit, and especially when you're, like, let's say off season or out of camp. That's where a lot of the skill building should be coming in. So it's like, hey, there's some areas that we can work on, that we can add in. So for me, if I can get him in a switch stance, it's really to open up his left kick. We saw him throw the left head kick at Stipe, and it was, I believe he did a drop step to open up his hip to throw the left kick. It might even been a same side, but his left high kick is very nice, but it's also better when he's coming out of the southpaw stance. So how do we get him over in that southpaw stance? And sometimes that's within motion. And when we're able to give him those reps, maybe it's a switch cross hook, and then now the left head kick will come, but he understands where the traps are. So it's like, okay, if a guy wants to float and get away from my overhand, my right hand, he's naturally going to drift this direction. As he drifts, now I can switch stance over to here and make my left head kick available for me. And it's all fluid. It's not this like herky jerky motion, right? It just kind of flows into that kick. So for him, I think those building blocks are there. He's starting to understand it more and more, and we're seeing him do it more rather than just be here, I'm orthodox, and then all of a sudden now I'm southpaw. You didn't really trick anybody. You like to try to do that within motion and catch guys off guard as you do it.
One thing that seems to me will be important. It's important in every high level fight, but really this one, it's interesting. I was going back and I was looking at some of the knockouts that Francis has scored, and what I've seen is that a lot of times guys were kind of a little bit far away. They would make some giant motion to get there. Francis would see it coming. He would slip, and then he would counter over the top, and then with the other hand behind it with the fighter usually crouched in one side or the other, and they would get torn up. Like I don't see Gane doing that, because that's just not the kind of punches he throws, but it sort of underscores something about Gane, namely, he'll play at range with the little outside, calf kicks and then move away and whatever he's doing for collecting data. But it seems to me he's actually I think he's going to try and thread the needle about getting inside a proper range, where if he's going to try to throw a punch on Francis, he wants to be in a nice, effective range to be able to do it. He probably has an exit plan, I'm sure. Otherwise, he won't have much of an evening. But don't you feel like one of the biggest challenges with Gane might be, here's a guy who's not going to try and do a blast double from way outside or, some wide overhand. He's going to get right in that space, and that's going to be hard to anticipate and to an extent deter.
Yeah, you're gonna have to find him at times too, and you're absolutely right. I think his precision and his accuracy is what he does very, very well, but it's also his exit plan that I think that he does exceptionally well, because we don't see him really get hit. We don't really see him get squared up and hit very much. So I think the creativity side of things on how we want to approach maybe a more unorthodox style, or maybe something he hasn't seen off of those exit plans, and how do we want to attack, are going to be important. But the biggest thing for me is how do you keep him kind of trapped? If he has room to move, I think that's where you're going to have a lot of problems with him, and you're going to be kind of on an island. But if you can maybe put him in some of those corner posts or those barriers to limit some of his movement, I think you're better off.
This is going to be a weird question. I don't even know if it makes sense, but I'm going to try and ask it this way. In trying to get to a position where you are comfortable with Francis, in terms of the preparation anyway, a fight can be chaotic, but in terms of the prep to get him ready to beat Ciryl, do you have to pull him in a direction where he has to add new skills, or is it really the magnification of what he already has and that's enough?
I think you want to bring in a little bit of new skills to the table for him, because this is a different style of fight than what we had with Stipe. I think that there's some things that we're going to have to incorporate that might look a little different, but with purpose. And, yeah, I think it's a little bit of mix of both. I think you can go back to the Stipe fight and really go, okay, we did great in a lot of these areas here, and that should be your meat and potatoes of what the main course should look like. But then we also have to prepare some more side dishes that might be different than what we had at Thanksgiving dinner the last year, right? So, I think for me, that's the fun, creative part that I love about the sport, Luke, is like I get to get in the lab and try to figure those things out.
Have you guys figured out exactly the right weight for Francis? Not for just this bout, but like where he's best?
I prefer 255. I prefer that. The Jairzinho fight, I believe we ended up weighing in like 260, but because the pandemic and everything that hit, the week we were supposed to leave for Columbus, Ohio, he was about 250, 256, 257, which would have put us about 255 when we stepped on the scale. And then the fight got pushed back a couple of weeks, and then he gained a little weight, and then back and forth. So I think we ended up stepping on the scale at 260. In this particular fight, I think less weight might be better for us for the cardio side of things. And, we understand that muscle commands more oxygen. So just making sure that he's in shape and nice and lean, I think is important. But not only for this fight, I just feel like he's healthier around that 260, 255 mark.
How does Francis, when he talks to you, assess what he's up against with Gane? On some level, he must really know better than the rest of us, having sparred with him and knows him on some personal level. Has he articulated to you how he sees and envisions this challenge?
He's very nonchalant about it, and not saying he's overlooking him, not saying he's overlooking Gane or anything like that. But he just is like, yeah, the guy's good, but I just know that I'm better. I just know the areas that I've seen the guy. I know where I can beat him, and I know what I'm capable of doing, which as a coach, I think is kind of refreshing in a way, because it's the delivery, right? He's not like, this guy, I'm not even going to train for it. It's nothing like that. He has every chip on his shoulder that you can imagine, but really it's just like the confidence that I think he has in him, right? There's a big difference between being cocky and being confident. And I think that's what he exudes in this, is just like, hey, he's very confident in what he's able to do and what his skill set is. And I think where he's developing as well, but by no means is he overlooking him at all.
Do you feel like this could be one of those Volkanovski and Max situations? And by that, what I mean is, listen, if Gane gets viciously KO'd, then he's going to get put back in the queue in a place where we don't have to necessarily worry about seeing him anytime soon. At the same time, even if he loses and it's very, very close, or he wins and it's very, very close, I just feel like these two guys to me look like they might be, Blades is still developing, so we'll see. But for right now, these two guys look like they're ahead of the division. We don't know if John Jones is really going to what he's going to do. If these two guys are where they are, unless one of them really puts the stamp on the other, they're going to have to see each other a few times.
It's funny that you say that, Luke, because when you and I were texting this week, that was one of the things that came to my mind, where people will talk about this matchup. And in my head, this is probably one of three, no matter what happens, because of the age and the proximity of what they're at in rankings, I just see us fighting this guy a couple times in our career, and it's just probably one of three because of where they're at. Just like you said, I mean, there's some young up and coming guys in the heavyweight division that are going to shake things up as the years go on. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I feel like no matter the outcome of this fight coming up in January, we'll probably see each other again in the near future for sure.
Well, I can't wait to see that and whatever else you guys have cooking up in the very famous Xtreme Couture lab. Eric Nicksick, head coach over there for Francis, and of course for that entire team. We appreciate your time and can't wait for the 22nd of 2022.
Me too. Thanks for having me, Luke.